Era zero war serum. A single sentence can be a key turning a lock you never knew existed. For Eliza, 006. Holay, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in her mother's medical bills. That sentence was a simple observation. 015. For Gideon Pierce, a man insulated from the world by billions of dollars. It was Era 021, a crack in the foundation of his entire life. She was just trying to get through 0026, her shift. He was just another faceless tycoon in a suit. But when she saw the 0032 ring on his finger, a flicker of a memory became an inferno that would threaten to burn down a century-old 0039 dynasty. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a casual remark in a 0045 cheap diner unraveled a web of lies, betrayal, and a secret that one of 51 America's most powerful families thought was buried forever. The fluorescent 56 lights of the corner booth diner hummed a monotonous tune, a sound Eliza Holay, 103, knew better than her own heartbeat. It was the soundtrack to her life, the sizzle of burgers on the griddle, the 0110 clatter of cheap ceramic plates, the low murmur of conversations that never 0115 seemed to change. At 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, the diner was in its nightly 1.22 lull, a brief respite between the dinner rush and the late-night crowd. Eliza 1.27 leaned against the cool stainless steel counter, rolling her shoulders to work 1.32 out a knot of exhaustion. Every muscle acted with a fatigue that was more than physical. It was the soul 0141 deep weariness of watching her mother Laura slowly fade in a sterile beige 0147 hospital room. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Eliza from her thoughts. 0154. A man stepped inside, and an invisible curtain of silence seemed to fall over 0159, the diner. He wasn't just well-dressed. He was sculpted from a different material than the rest of the world. His 0206 suit, a charcoal gray so dark it was nearly black, fit him with the precision 02.12 of a surgeon's scalpel. His shoes gleamed even under the diner's grimy 02.17 lights. He had the kind of quiet, absolute confidence that doesn't need to be announced. It simply is. The few 02.25 remaining patrons instinctively lowered their voices. He chose a booth in the corner, sliding onto the cracked vinyl 0232 seat with an economy of motion. Eliza grabbed a menu and a glass of water, her 0238 professional smile pasted on. Welcome to the corner booth. Can I get you started 0243 with something? The man didn't look at the menu, his eyes a startlingly clear shade of blue. 0250 met hers for a brief dismissive moment. Just coffee, black. His voice was low, 0257 and resonant, a cello in a room of tin whistles. Coming right up, Eliza said. 0303 retreating to the counter. Her friend and fellow waitress, Chloe, sidled up to 0308 her. Get a load of Mr. Moneybags, thinks he's too good for a menu. $10, says 0316. He's Gideon Pierce. Eliza frowned as she poured the coffee. Who? Gideon Pierce. Pierce Holdings 0325 International. They own half the downtown skyline. My dad used to be a foreman on one of their 0332 sites before he got laid off. That guy's picture is in the business section every 0338 other week. They say he's ruthless. Turned his family's millions into 0344 billions before he was 30. Eliza glanced over at the man. He was staring out the 0351 window, his profile sharp and severe against the neon-lit street. He looked 0357 less like a businessman and more like a predator resting between hunts. She 0403 picked up the cup and saucer. Well, to me, he's just another customer who wants black coffee. She walked back to the 0410 booth and set the coffee down. Here you are, sir. As he reached for the cup, his hand, Joe 417, emerged from his cufflink-adorned sleeve, and on his right ring finger, 0422 nestled against his skin, was a ring that made Eliza's breath catch in her throat. It wasn't the size or the gleam 0430 of it that stopped her. It was the design, an intricate masculine signet or a 435 ring made of a pale buttery gold. Etched into the flat face was a sigil, a 0442 stylized phoenix. Its wings spread wide with a single tiny sapphire set in its 0448 eye. sparkling like a captured star. The band itself was unique, carved to look Oro 455 like intertwined feathers. Eliza's mind reeled. She saw the same ring, not Oro 501, gleaming under a dinerite, but resting in a small, velvet-lined box on her 0506 mother's bedside table. Laura's ring was identical in every detail, down to the 0512 tiny, impossibly blue sapphire eye. It was her most cherished possession, the 0519 one thing she'd refused to sell, even when the medical bills became a tidal 0524 wave, threatening to drown them. Her father, she'd always said, had given it 0529 to her on his deathbed. "It's a promise, Eliza," she would whisper 0535, her voice thin and ready. "A promise of what's right." The words 0541 tumbled out of Eliza's mouth before she could stop them. A quiet, stunned whisper. 0547. "Hi, sir. My mother has a ring, just like yours." Gideon Pierce froze his hand, 0553, hovering over the coffee cup. He slowly retracted it, and his piercing blue eyes, 558, lifted to meet hers. The casual dismissal was gone, replaced by a sudden 064 glacial intensity. He didn't speak. He simply stared, his 0609 gaze so sharp and analytical, it felt like he was dissecting her, searching for the punchline to a joke she wasn't 0616 telling. "Excuse me," he finally said, his voice 0622 dropping an octave, becoming dangerously soft. Eliza's heart hammered against her 0627 ribs. She felt Chloe's worried stare from across the room. She should have 0633 just walked away, kept her mouth shut. But the image of her mother's frail hand, 0638, clutching that identical ring, was burned into her mind. "The ring?" she stammered, pointing a 0646 trembling finger. "On your hand. It's the same as my mother's. The 0652 Phoenix, the little sapphire, everything. A flicker of something unreadable. 0659 crossed his face. Not surprise, not recognition, but something harder, darker. He slowly turned his hand over, 0707, examining the ring, as if seeing it for the first time. "That's impossible," he stated. "It wasn't a guess. It was a 0715 verdict." "But it's not," Eliza insisted, her voice gaining a desperate 0720 edge. "She's had it my whole life. Her father gave it to her. It's one of a 0725 kind," he told her. Gideon Pierce placed his hand flat on the table of the ring, a 0732 silent golden accusation. His gaze was cold steel. "This ring," he said, 0739, enunciating each word with chilling precision, "has been in the Pierce family for over 100 years. It was custom-made 0747 for my great-grandfather, all Alaric Pierce. There is no other. There has 0753 never been another." "You are mistaken." The finality in his tone felt like a 0759 slap. He was calling her a liar, or worse, a fool. The injustice of it piled 805 on top of her exhaustion, and fear for her mother ignited a spark of defiance, 0811 in her. "I'm not mistaken," she said, her voice low but firm. "I've held it in 0819, my hands 1,000 times. I know every detail on it. I could draw it from 0825 memory." He leaned back, a faint, condescending smile touching his lips. 0830. It didn't reach his eyes. "A fascinating story. What is your name?" "Eliza." "Eliza. 0838. Hole." "Well, Miss Hole," he said, picking up his coffee cup and taking a slow, 0844 deliberate sip. "Your mother is either a liar or a thief, because the only way 0850 she has a ring like this is if it's the one that was stolen from my family 55 years ago." He set the cup down with a soft click. The sound echoed in the 0902 sudden silence of Eliza's world. Stolen. The word hung in the air, thick and 0908 poisonous. Her mother, the gentlest, most honest person she knew. A thief. Tone 14. The accusation was so absurd, so vile, it was like being told the sun rose in Nocturne 20 the West. Gideon Pierce reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a slim leather Warner 925 wallet, and extracted 3 $100 bills, placing them on the table. It was more 0932 than she made in 2 shifts. It was an insult, a dismissal for the coffee and our 938 your time, he said, his eyes already looking past her toward the door. E0943 stood up, the power of his presence filling the small booth. He was already gone, moving on, leaving her in the Euro 950 wreckage of his words. As he walked toward the exit, Eliza found her voice. 0956. She's not a thief. He paused at the door, his back to her. He didn't turn 1002 around, but his voice carried clearly across the quiet diner. 1007, then prove it. The bell chimed again, and he was gone, leaving Eliza standing 1013 in the middle of the corner booth. Her heart pounding, the hum of the lights now sounding like a scream. The 3 1020 crisp bills on the table felt like blood money. She hadn't just served coffee to 1026, a billionaire. She had stumbled into a story, his story, and in doing so, she 1032 realized with a cold dread she may have just destroyed her own. The drive to the 1038 hospital was a blur of traffic lights and the anxious thumping of her own 1044 heart. Gideon Pierce's words echoed in her head. A liar or a thief? It was 1050 preposterous. Laura Hollet was a woman who would walk back into a store to return a few cents 1056 of extra change. The accusation was a poison dart, and Eliza felt its venom 1102 spreading through her. She found her mother sleeping, her face pale and sunken against the pristine white of the 1109 hospital pillow. The ever-present beep of the cardiac monitor was a fragile 1114 rhythmic reassurance. On the small bedside table next to a glass of water and a well-worn book of 1121 poetry sat the small, dark blue velvet box. With trembling hands, Eliza picked 1128 it up. The velvet was worn smooth in places. She opened the lid. There at 1134 was the pale gold ring catching the low light from the hallway, the phoenix with 1140, its proud spread wings, and the eye a tiny sapphire that seemed to hold a 1146 universe of secrets. It was identical. There was no question. 1151. Eliza, honey, is that you? Laura's voice was weak, raspy. Eliza quickly shut the 1157 box and turned, forcing a smile. Hey, Mom, I didn't mean to wake you. Your 1203 late rough shift. Laura's eyes, though clouded with illness, were still sharp, still full of 12.10, a fierce love that had been Eliza's anchor her entire life. The usual. Eliza 1218 couldn't bring herself to tell the truth. How could she voice such a monstrous accusation to this frail 1225 woman? How are you feeling? Like I've been run over by a very slow, very 1231 expensive truck, Laura said with a weak smile. The doctors were in. More talk 1238 of options. It all sounds the same. She shifted in the bed, wincing, and her 1244 eyes fell on the box in Eliza's hand. Her expression changed. The weariness 1250 was replaced by a familiar, guarded look. You were looking at the ring. 1257. Eliza hesitated. I was just thinking about it, about Dad. 1305, Laura's hand, thin and crisscrossed with blue veins, reached out and she patted 1310, the mattress beside her. Eliza sat down. Your grandfather, Laura corrected 1315 gently, as she always did. It was my father who gave it to me, not 1321 yours. Eliza's father had been a good man, a mechanic who died in a workshop accident 1328 when she was 10, leaving behind nothing but debts and happy memories. The ring 1334 predated him. Right, Granddad, Eliza said, her mind racing. Mom, tell me 1341 about him again. About the ring? Laura's gaze drifted to the window to the dark sky outside. 1349. There's not much to tell that you haven't heard. My father Owen was a quiet man, a brilliant man, an engineer. 1357, he worked for a big corporation back east. He said the ring was payment for a 1402 promise, a promise that was broken by powerful men. What kind of promise? 1408, Eliza pressed, trying to keep her voice casual. He never said, only that it was 1414, about recognizing what was right. He made me swear to never sell it to keep it safe. He said, one day it might be 1421. The only proof we have. Proof of what? A flicker of fear, real and raw, crossed 1428 Laura's face. She looked at Eliza, her eyes pleading. Leave it be, Eliza. It's 1433, an old story, a sad story. It has nothing to do with us anymore. Some 1439 doors are best left closed. But Mom, what if someone else has a reason to 1445 open that door? The words were out before she could stop them. Laura's grip 1450 on her hand tightened. What do you mean? What happened? Eliza 1456 saw the spike on the heart monitor and cursed herself. Nothing. It's nothing. 1502. Just a stupid thing at work. She couldn't burden her mother with this. 1507. Not now. She needed to protect her. But the seed of doubt had been planted. A 1514 promise that was broken by powerful men. Who were they? And what did any of it 1520 have to do with Gideon Pierce? 1527. Miles away in a penthouse apartment that seemed to float above the city, Gideon 1532. Pierce stood before a floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights spread out below 1538, him like a carpet of scattered diamonds. He held a glass of scotch, the amber 1544 liquid untouched. He hadn't been able to shake the encounter at the diner. The 1549 girl, Eliza Holay, her wide, honest eyes, her absolute certainty. My mother 1556 has a ring just like yours. It was ludicrous. And yet he walked over to a 1603 heavy mahogany desk and switched on a green-shaded lamp. From a locked drawer 1609, he retrieved a leather-bound folio. The Pierce Family Archives. It was a curated 1615 sanitized history, of course, but it was all he had. He opened it to the section 1621 on family heirlooms. There on a yellowed page was a photograph of the ring. His 1627 ring. The description was clear. The Phoenix signet commissioned in 1922 by 1635 Alaric Pierce, forged by artisan Michel Dubois of Paris. Unique design, 1642 symbol of the Pierce family's rebirth from the ashes of the 1921 financial 1648 panic. Sole ownership passed down to the male heir of each generation. His father, 1654, had given him the ring on his 21st birthday. It represents our resilience, Gideon, he'd said, his 1702 voice thick with pride. We always rise. Never forget that. Gideon's 1707 phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen. Genevieve Adler, he's 1713, answered. Adler, you're still up, came a crisp, no-nonsense voice. Genevieve Adler was more 1721 than his lawyer. She was his fixer, the executive of his will, and the keeper of his secrets. Something has come up, 1729, Gideon said, his voice tight. I need you to run a background check, 1734, discreetly. Another hostile takeover. A person. Her 1740 name is Eliza Holay. She works at a diner on 6th Street called the Corner 1745 Booth. Her mother's name is Laura Holay. I want to know everything. Financials, 1752 family, history, where they came from, who their people were, everything. Their 1757 was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Genevieve was too professional to ask why, but he could feel her 1804 curiosity. Is this a personal or professional matter, Gideon? Gideon 1810 looked at the ring on his finger, the phoenix staring back at him with its cold sapphire eye. 1818. I'm not sure yet, he admitted, a rare moment of uncertainty. 1823. But it has the potential to become problematic. He thought back to the story his 1829 grandfather used to tell, a story told only in hushed tones after a few to 1835. Many brandies about Alaric Pierce's younger brother Daniel. How Daniel had 1841 betrayed the family, tried to steal Alaric's designs for a new kind of turbine engine, and in his greed had 1848 taken the spare signet ring Alaric had foolishly commissioned Daniel. The story 1854 went was disowned, cast out, and the ring was lost with him, a symbol of 19-oran treachery. But the official family history, the one in the folio, never mentioned a second ring. It never 1907 mentioned a brother named Daniel. It was a ghost story, a family legend until 1913 now. Find out who Laura Holloway's father was. Gideon commanded his voice, 1920 hardening again, the moment of uncertainty passing. I want his name. I 1926 want to know what he did for a living. And I want to know if he ever, for any 1931 reason, crossed paths with my family. He hung up the phone. The waitress had said 1937 her grandfather gave her mother the ring, A quiet engineer, 1942 broken promises, powerful men. For the first time in a very long time, Gideon, 1949. Pierce felt a sliver of something other than control. It felt like walking on 1954 thin ice, hearing the first faint crackle of it, giving way beneath his feet. He had told the girl to prove it. 2003, but now he realized with a grim certainty he had to do the same. He had 2008 to prove his own story was the truth. 3 days later, the name arrived in a single 2014 encrypted line of text from Genevieve Adler Owen Callaway. The name meant 2020 nothing to Gideon. He ran it through the private databases of Pierce Holdings, 2025 cross-referencing it with employee records, contractor lists, and financial dealings going back a century. Nothing. 2033. No Owen Callaway had ever worked for or with his family's company. He felt a 2039 wave of relief quickly followed by suspicion. It was too clean. He was 2044 stewing in his office, a vast expanse of glass and steel on the 80th floor, when 2050 Genevieve herself appeared at his door. She was a severe woman in her 50s, 2057 always dressed in impeccably tailored suits, her gray hair pulled back in a 2102 tight shiny. She held a thin file. "You're not going to like this," she 2108 said, foregoing any greeting. She placed the file on his desk. Gideon opened it. 2114 inside were public records, a birth certificate for Laura Ann Callaway, born in Wilmington, Delaware. Father 2122, Owen Callaway, mother Helen Callaway, and then another document, a patent 2129 application from 1968. Inventor Owen Callaway, invention, a 2135 novel gearing system for high-torque industrial turbines. A SNE of patent 2142 none. Application withdrawn. Gideon's blood ran cold. He recognized the 2148 schematic. It was a primitive but unmistakable precursor to the Pierce Mark III turbine, the very invention 2156 that had catapulted his grandfather's company from a regional player into a 2202 global powerhouse in the early 70s. The invention credited solely to his 2207 grandfather, William Pierce. The application was withdrawn on October 22nd and 13th of 12th, 1968. Genevieve said, her voice flat. According to banking records IG 2219 accessed on October 14th, 1968, Owen Callaway made a one-time cash deposit of $50,000 into his savings account, a significant sum for an engineer at the 22-31 time. He quit his job a week later, moved his family, and never worked in engineering again. He died of a heart 2239 attack 6 years later at the age of 42. The pieces clicked into place with 2246 sickening clarity, a non-disclosure agreement, a cash payoff, a brilliant 2253 idea bought and buried under the Pierce name. So he was bought off. Gideon said 2259, the words tasting like ash. My grandfather stole his invention and paid 23 for him to keep quiet. It appears that way, Genevieve confirmed. The $50,000 was likely 2311 positioned as a consulting fee to keep it legal. There's no paper trail linking 23.17 it directly to the patent. Of course, your grandfather was meticulous. And the 2322 ring, Gideon asked, looking at his own hand. That, Genevieve said, is where at 2328 gets strange. I found the jeweler who bought the assets of Dubois Ace of 2334 Paris. The records are ancient, but their ledgers were like your grandfather, meticulous. In 1922, 2341, Alaric Pierce commissioned 2 identical Phoenix signet rings. He paid 2346 for both. There's a note in the margin in the artisan's hand. She slid a 2352 translated copy across the desk. It read, one for the builder, one for the 2358 dreamer. May they fly together. 2 rings. The family ghost story wasn't a 2404 story. It was true. His great-uncle Daniel existed. 2409. So Callaway didn't steal the ring, Gideon murmured, thinking aloud. Daniel 2414. Pierce, the disowned brother, must have given it to him. But why? As a thank, 2420. You, a token for a friend, or something more. The puzzle was no longer about a 2426 simple diner waitress. It was about the very bedrock of his family's legacy. It 2432 was built not just on resilience, but on a lie. The knowledge was a corrosive 2437 acid in his gut. He had to speak to her again. Eliza was wiping down the counter 2444 at the end of another grueling shift when the bell on the door chimed. Her 2449 heart sank. It was him. Gideon Pierce didn't enter the diner this time. He 2456 stood in the doorway, the city lights framing him like a dark halo. He was 2502, dressed more casually in dark trousers and a cashmere sweater, but he still radiated an unapproachable aura of 2510 power. M. Holloway, he said, his voice quiet, 2515, but caring. I need to speak with you. Chloe shot her a nervous look. Eliza, you don't 2522 have to, but Eliza knew she did. She untied her apron and hung it on its 2528 hook. It's okay. I'll be right back. She stepped out into the cool night air. The 2536 street was loud with the sounds of the city, a stark contrast to the tense silence that fell between them. Your 2543 mother's father? Gideon began getting straight to the point. His name was Owen 2548. Calloway, it wasn't a question. Eliza flinched. How did he know that? Yes. 2555. What of it? He was an engineer. In 1968, he filed a patent for a turbine gear 26103 system. Gideon watched her face, carefully gauging her reaction. Eliza's 2608 mind went blank. She knew her grandfather was an engineer, but the details were a fog. Her mother never 26-16 spoke of his work, only of his sadness. I don't know anything about that, she 2621 said honestly. I think you do. Gideon countered, his voice sharp with 2627 impatience. Or your mother does. My grandfather, William Pierce, launched a 2632 turbine based on an identical design a few years later. It made my family a 2637 fortune. Calloway withdrew his patent and accepted a cash payment. This isn't 2643 about a stolen ring anymore, is it, Ms. Holay? This is about a shakedown. Is 2648 that's your plan? Use this old story to leverage a payday for your mother's medical bills. The accusation was so 2656 cynical, so cruel, it knocked the air from her lungs. Tears of pure rage and 2703 frustration sprang to her eyes. How dare you, she whispered, her voice 2709 shaking. You stand there in your 1000 sweater looking down on us. My 2714 mother is fighting for her life. You think this is about money? This is about her honor. The honor of a man you just 2722 admitted your family probably robbed. For the first time, Gideon looked taken back. He saw not a schemer, but a 2730 daughter pushed to her breaking point. My grandfather told my mother that ring 2736 was proof, Eliza continued, her voice rising. Proof that he was wronged. He 2742 didn't take a payoff. He was threatened, forced to sign away his life's work to 2747, protect his family from men like your grandfather. That money wasn't a payment. It was hush 2753 money to ensure he never spoke of it again. She was channeling her mother's 2760 long-held, unspoken pain. The words felt true, solid, righteous. Gideon was silent 2807 for a long moment, the sounds of the city rushing in to fill the space between them. His own certainty was 2814 eroding, replaced by the disquing possibility that the Waitress's version of the story, a tale of threats and 2822 coercion, was closer to the truth than the sanitized version of a simple business transaction he had constructed. 2830. There were 2 rings, he said, his voice losing its hard edge. My 2836 great-grandfather had 2 made, one for him and one for his brother Daniel. The 2843 family story is that Daniel was a traitor who was cast out. He looked at 2849 her, his blue eyes searching her face. Was your grandfather friends with a man 2854 named Daniel Pierce? Eliza stared at him, bewildered. Daniel Pierce? I've 2860 never heard that name in my life. They were at an impasse. 2 families, 2 2905 rings, and 2 completely different histories that intersected at a single 2910 disputed point in the past. One story of a clean, if ruthless, business deal, 2917, another of theft and intimidation, and at the center of it all, a ghost 2922 named Daniel Pierce, and a ring that was supposed to be a promise. My mother has 2929 the ring, Eliza said, her resolve hardening. You have your story. I have 2934 mine, and I'm going to find out which one is true. Gideon gave a single sharp nod. 2942. The condescension was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. So am I. He turned 2948 and walked away, disappearing into the city's shadows, leaving Eliza with the chilling realization that their quest 2955 for the truth was now inextricably and dangerously linked. The confrontation 3001 with Gideon Pierce left Eliza shaken but resolute. She had defended her family's 3006 honor, but his questions echoed in her mind. Daniel Pierce. 3013. The name was a blank slate. She returned to the hospital the next 3018 day with a new sense of urgency. She found Laura sitting up looking a 3024, little stronger than the day before. The poetry book was open on her lap. Mom. 3030. Eliza began pulling a chair close. We need to talk for real this time. No more 3036 secrets. Laura sighed a long, weary sound and closed the book. I knew this day would 3043 come. Seeing you with the box, I knew you wouldn't let it go. She looked at 3049, her daughter, her eyes full of a deep, ancient sorrow. 3054. What did he say to you? He, Eliza asked, feigning ignorance. Don't play coy, 3101. Eliza, the man from the diner. You think a man like Gideon Pierce makes a scene 3108, and it doesn't get noticed, Chloe called me. She was worried sick. Eliza's 3114 shoulders slumped. He found me. He knows about Granddad Owen. He thinks we're trying to 3121 blackmail him. He thinks Granddad sold his invention to the Pierce family. 3128. Laura's expression hardened. Sold it? Is that what they call it? She 3133 scoffed a bitter rattling sound. Your grandfather was a genius, Eliza, a 3139 gentle, trusting soul who thought the world worked on merit and good faith. He 3144 was working at a large firm, a competitor to Pierce Industries at the time. He developed his turbine gearing 3151 system on his own time. It was his masterpiece. She paused, her gaze distant, lost in 3159, the memory. He made the mistake of mentioning it to a colleague trusting him. That colleague left the company 2/32/06 months later for a senior position at Pierce Industries. 6 months after that, your grandfather 32.14 received a visit from two men. They weren't lawyers. They were persuaders. 3220. They worked for William Pierce. The sterile hospital room suddenly felt cold. 3227. What did they do? Eliza whispered. They didn't lay a hand on him, Laura 3233 said, her voice dropping. They were smarter than that. They laid out photographs on our kitchen table. 3240, pictures of me playing in the schoolyard. Pictures of your grandmother leaving the 3245 grocery store. They told him what a beautiful family he had. And they told 3252 him it would be a shame if something were to happen to them. Then they put a stack of papers in front of him. A 3258 non-disclosure agreement and a contract assigning all rights to his invention to 3304, a shell corporation owned by Pierce Industries, and an envelope full of cash. 3312. The story was uglier than Eliza could have imagined. This wasn't business. It was gangster tactics. 3319. He signed everything, Laura continued, her voice trembling. What choice did 3324 he have? He took the money because refusing it would have been an act of defiance, and he was too scared to defy 3332 them. We moved a week later. He was a broken man, Eliza. They didn't just 3339 steal his work, they stole his soul. He died 6 years later. But the truth is, 3345, they killed him that day in our kitchen. Tears streamed down Eliza's face. She, 3351, finally understood the deep well of sadness in her mother, the fear behind her warnings. 3357, but the ring, Mom? Eliza pressed gently. Where does the ring come into it? Who 3404 is Daniel Pierce? Laura flinched at the name, a genuine 3409 startled reaction. Where did you hear that name? Gideon told me. He said his 3414 great-grandfather had 2 rings made, one for himself and one for his brother 3420, Daniel, who was disowned. Laura was silent for a full minute, her 3425 brow furrowed in concentration. Daniel Owen never said the name Pierce. 3432. He only ever called him my friend, his only friend in that terrible time. 3438. She began to recount a different part of the story, one she'd never shared. After 3444, Owen was forced out. He fell into a deep depression, but one man sought him out. 3451. A man who introduced himself only as Daniel. He was a drifter, an outcast in 3456, but he had an artist's soul and a hatred for the kind of corporate greed 3502 that had destroyed Owen. He had heard what happened to Owen through the engineering grapevine. 3508. This Daniel Laura recounted told your grandfather that he too had been 35 betrayed by a powerful family. He understood what it was to have everything stolen by your own blood. 3521. They became friends. Two broken men finding solace in each other's company. 3527. Before Daniel left town for good, he gave Owen the ring. She looked at Eliza, 3533, her eyes intense. He told Owen this was meant to symbolize a shared dream. 3539. Between brothers. It was forged in hope and tainted by greed. It belongs to the 3545 wronged, not the wrongdoer. Keep it as proof that integrity has a value that 3551 money can't buy. One day the phoenix will rise for the right person. Owen, 3558, cherished that ring more than the invention itself. It was a symbol that he wasn't alone in his suffering. So 3605, Daniel Pierce wasn't a traitor. He was another victim, and he had given the ring his own birthright to another 3613 wrong man as an act of solidarity. The story was so much more profound, so much 3620 more tragic than Gideon's cold family ledger. 3626. At the same time, Gideon was in his family's ancestral home, a sprawling 3631 stone estate an hour outside the city. He rarely came here. It felt more like a 3637 museum than a home filled with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. 3643 in the library, a room paneled in dark wood that smelled of old paper, in 3648 polish, he met his cousin, Robert Pierce. Robert was a few years older, with a practiced smile and the easy 3655 charm of a man who had never worked a day in his life. He managed the family's 3701 charitable foundation, a role that required him to attend galas and cut ribbons. Gideon, to what do we owe the 3709 honor? Robert said, pouring 2 glasses of brandy, tired of the concrete jungle. 3716. I'm looking for information. Robert, Gideon said, cutting to the 3721 chase about great-uncle Daniel. Robert's smile faltered for a fraction of a 3727 second. Daniel, the black sheep, that old ghost story. What's gotten into you? 3735. I have reason to believe the story is true, and I need to know the details. The real details, not the sanitized 3742 version. Robert swirled the brandy in his snifter, suddenly looking 3747 thoughtful. Well, you know the legend. He was the younger brother, the artist, the 3754 dreamer. All Alaric was the pragmatist, the builder. Daniel apparently accused 3801 Alaric of stealing his ideas for the company's early successes, tried to stage a boardroom coup. When it failed, 3808 he vanished, but not before stealing a valuable ring and supposedly selling 3814 company secrets to a rival. Robert sighed dramatically. A classic tale of 3820 sibling rivalry and betrayal. It's why the line of succession has always been 3826, so rigidly defined, to prevent another Daniel. This was the story Gideon had always 3832 known, but hearing it now, it felt thin theatrical, a convenient narrative to 3839 justify Alaric's consolidation of power. And you believe that? Gideon, 3845, asked. Why shouldn't I? It's our history, Robert said with a shrug. 3851. It's a bit dramatic, sure, but it explains why the family closed ranks. 3856. Why Grandpa William was so aggressive in his business dealings. He was protecting the family legacy from vultures from 3903, another betrayal. He leaned forward, his voice conspiratorial. Why the sudden interest? Did one of his 3910 descendants crawl out of the woodwork looking for a handout? The question was casual, but the look in Robert's eyes, 3918, was sharp probing. Gideon felt a sudden instinctual distrust. Robert had always, 3924 seemed vapid, but perhaps that was a carefully constructed facade. 3930. It's a private matter, Gideon said, his voice clipped. Of course. Of course. 3936, Robert said, leaning back, the charming smile returning. Well, if you want to, 3942, dig up old bones, be my guest. The old family papers are in the West Wing study. Gramps Williams' private 3949 correspondence. Knock yourself out. Just don't be surprised if the ghost you find is 3955, uglier than you imagine. Gideon left Robert with his brandy and 40 High went to the study. The room was dusty, unused for years. He found the boxes of 4006 letters tied with faded ribbon. For hours he sorted through them, reading his grandfather's elegant, cursive 4013 script. Most of it was business. But then he found a series of letters from 4019, the late 1960s, addressed to his grandfather's head of security. The 4024 content made him feel ill. There were updates on the surveillance of a man named Owen Calloway, reports on his 4031 daughter's school schedule, his wife's daily routine, and then a final chilling 4037 memo. Subject Calloway has been neutralized. Assets secured. He is no 4042 longer a threat. Neutralized. Assets secured. Eliza Hole's story was true. 4049, it was all true. His family's fortune was built on theft and cemented with 4055 threats. The weight of the discovery was crushing, but as he continued to sift 4010 through the papers, he found something else, something that didn't fit either his story or Eliza's. It was a single 4108 folded note separate from the letters tucked into the back of a ledger. It was in his grandfather William's 4114 handwriting, but it was frantic, almost illegible. He knows I found him. He can 4121 ruin everything. Daniel is the key. Must protect the name. The note was undated. 41-28. Who was he? And who was our Robert? It seemed too convenient. And what did it 4134 mean? Daniel is the key. Daniel was supposed to be a ghost, a 4140 long-vanished traitor. But this note, written decades after Daniel's 4145 disappearance, spoke of him as a present active threat. 4150, Gideon stood in the dusty, silent study, holding two conflicting testaments. In 4156, one hand, the sordid truth of his grandfather's crime against Owen Calloway. In the other, a cryptic note 4203 that suggested a deeper, more complex conspiracy was at play. The story was no 4209, longer just about his grandfather and Eliza's. There was a third player, a hidden thread, and the name of that 4216 thread was Daniel. The discovery of his grandfather's note threw Gideon into a 4222 state of focused obsession. He knows RH found him. Daniel is the 4228 key. It was a cipher, and Gideon knew he couldn't crack it alone. The animosity 4234 between him and Eliza had melted away, replaced by the grim reality that they 4240 were the only two people with a stake in the complete truth. He found her where 4245 he knew she'd be in the hospital cafeteria, staring into a cup of coffee with the same haunted expression he saw 4252 in the mirror. He sat down opposite her, placing a thin file on the table between 4250 of them. Your mother was right, he said, his voice devoid of its usual authority. 4304 filled instead with a quiet gravity about everything. The threats, the 4310 coercion. My grandfather put your family through hell. He pushed the file 4316 forward. It contained the copies of the surveillance reports on the Calloway family. 4322. This is the proof. Eliza opened the file, her hands 4327 trembling as she read the cold clinical descriptions of her mother as a little girl being watched. Her face palled. She 4336 looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of vindication and horror. Why 4342 are you showing me this? Because my story's falling apart, and so is yours, Gideon said. There's more 4350 to it. He told her about the note. Daniel is the key. It was written by my 4357 grandfather, William, long after your grandfather was silenced. He was scared 4403 of someone who knew the truth about Daniel. Eliza frowned. But Daniel 4410 gave my grandfather the ring. He was an outcast, a victim like Owen. That's what 4416 he told your grandfather. Gideon counted. But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if Daniel's 4423 disappearance wasn't just about him being cast out? We have two stories, yours and mine, but they're both based 4430 on what we were told by people who were themselves betrayed or lying. We need a 4437 primary source, an objective truth. Where do we find that? Eliza asked, the 4444 weight of a multi-generational conspiracy settling on her shoulders. The rings, 4450, Gideon said, a spark of inspiration in his eyes. They're the one constant. 4456, they're the origin point. My great-grandfather Alaric commissioned them from a Parisian artisan, Michel 4501 Dubois. The business is gone, but I found the firm that acquired its assets 4507, and more importantly, its records, the ledgers 4512 in Paris. Eliza's heart sank. That was a world away. I had the relevant pages scanned 4520 and sent over this morning, Gideon said, tapping his phone. The high-resolution images are waiting in my 4527 office. I need another set of eyes. Your eyes. You know your ring better than 4532 anyone. An hour later, Eliza found herself in a place she could never have 4538 imagined. Gideon Pierce's office on the 80th floor. The silence was absolute. 4544, the view of the city breathtaking. On a massive screen that covered one wall was 4550, a high-resolution image of a page from an old leather-bound ledger. The script was 4556, elegant, spidery French. A translated transcript scrolled beside it. They 4601 poured over the entry for all Alaric Pierce's 1922 commission. As Genevieve 4607 had discovered, it listed two identical rings. But as they zoomed in on the 4612 artisan's original French notes, Eliza saw something the translator had missed. 4617. The translator's note read, one for the builder, one for the dreamer. But the 4623 original French was more specific. Eliza had taken 4 years of French in high 4629 school. And while she was rusty, one phrase jumped out at her. 4637, guardian. That's not dreamer, Eliza said slowly. 4643, pointing at the screen. Guardian Deem. It means guardian of the soul. Gideon 4650 zoomed in reading the phrase. Guardian of the soul. He repeated the words 4655, feeling heavy and significant. A builder of an empire and a guardian of its soul. 4702. It wasn't a rivalry. It was meant to be a partnership, a balance. 4707. This changed everything. All Alaric and Daniel weren't meant to be competitors. They were meant to be two halves of a 4714 whole. The story of Daniel's betrayal was a complete fabrication. As they 4719 scanned further down the page, Gideon noticed a small annotation next to the 4724 entry, added in a different hand and with different ink. It was dated 1945. 4732. What's this? He murmured, enlarging the note. The French was spidery and 4737 difficult to read. Reçu Daniel Pierce, the note began. Received 4744. A letter from Mr. Daniel Pierce. Gideon translated haltingly. He asked for a 4750 modification to the second ring to the inside of the band. He is no longer a 4755 Pierce. He is something else. Gideon and Eliza exchanged a look. No longer a 4803 Pierce, Eliza whispered. He changed his name, Gideon realized. When he was 4808 cast out, he abandoned the family name entirely. The note continued. Errol 4816, Owen. He asked me to inscribe a name. Gideon read his voice, catching the name, 4824. Owen. Eliza gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. 4829. Owen, my grandfather's name. But this was in 1945. 4835. My grandfather wouldn't have met Daniel for another 20 years. It's not your grandfather's name, Gideon said, a 4842 sudden shocking realization dawning on him. He typed furiously on his keyboard, 4848, pulling up his family's genealogy records, going back further than he ever had before. His fingers flew, his mind, 4856, racing. He found his great-grandfather, all Alaric Pierce, then his 4901 great-grandmother, Beatrice, and then he found her family tree. Her maiden 4907 name was Beaumont, And her father, Alaric's father-in-law, his name was 4912. Owen Beaumont, a wealthy shipping magnate who had bankrolled Alaric's early 4918 ventures, who had died in 1944. The truth hit them both like a physical 4923 blow. The inscription wasn't for Eliza's grandfather. It was a memorial. 4930. The ring, Eliza breathed, piecing it together. The ring wasn't for two 4935 brothers to share. It was for a father and son. All Alaric Pierce and his son, 4942. William, my grandfather. No, Gideon said, his eyes wide with the horrifying 4948 clarity of the truth. All Alaric didn't have a son named William in 1922. His 4954 son William was born in 1925. In 1922, Alaric Pierce had one child, a son born 5001 in 1905, his firstborn son. He clicked one last time, and a black and white 5007 photograph filled the screen. It was a formal portrait of two young men, both 5013 handsome and proud. One was clearly a young Alaric Pierce. The other, the 5020 dreamer, the guardian of the soul, was his brother. Underneath the photograph 5025 was the caption, Alaric and Daniel Pierce, 1921. And beneath that, in the official 5032 genealogical record, was the final devastating piece of the puzzle. The 5037 entry for Daniel Pierce listed his full name, Daniel Owen Pierce. 5044, Daniel was the Owen the ring was inscribed for. It wasn't a memorial to 5049, his father-in-law. He was reclaiming his middle name, the only part of his 5055 identity his brother couldn't take from him. The twist was so profound, so 51 Ras complete, that the room fell silent. The entire family history was a lie. Daniel 5108 wasn't the younger brother. Based on his birth year, he was the older brother. He 5113 should have been the heir. Alaric was the younger son, the builder. And 5119, William Pierce Gideon's grandfather, wasn't Alaric's only son. He was the 5124 second son. Daniel was Alaric's firstborn. No, wait. Gideon looked at the birth dates again. Daniel, born 5132, 1905. William, born 1925. That couldn't be right. They weren't brothers. Alaric, 5139, and Daniel were brothers. But William wasn't Daniel's brother. He was 5145, his nephew. The story they'd been chasing was wrong. The players were 5150 wrong. Eliza's grandfather hadn't met a random outcast. He had met Daniel Owen, 5156. Pierce, the true disinherited heir to the Pierce fortune. And Daniel hadn't 5201 given him a token of solidarity. He had given him the ring, his own ring, 5206, inscribed with his own name for safekeeping. It was a piece of evidence. 5212, a dormant claim to an empire. And William Pierce Gideon's grandfather, 5217, hadn't just stolen an invention from Owen Callaway. He had done it to suppress a man who had been in contact, 5224, with the one person on earth who could challenge his own father's and therefore his own legitimacy, his uncle Daniel, 5231. Pierce, the note he knows. Found him. Daniel is the key, snapped into 5238 focus. He was Owen Callaway. R was likely Robert's father or grandfather, 5244, another part of the conspiracy. And Daniel was the key because his existence, 5250, and his connection to Callaway threatened to unravel the foundational lie upon which William Pierce's entire 5257 life and fortune were built. They hadn't just silenced an inventor. They were 53-4 silencing a witness. The truth pieced together from the artisan's ledger was 53-9 more corrupt than they had ever imagined. Daniel Owen Pierce, the rightful heir, had been systematically 5317 erased from history. Gideon's grandfather, William, had silenced Owen Callaway, not over a simple invention, 5325, but to bury the foundational lie of their family's power. It became 5330 terrifyingly clear that Gideon's cousin Robert knew this dirty secret and was 5336 positioning himself to use it as a weapon in a corporate power play. There was only one place to force a reckoning, 5343, the annual Pierce Foundation Charity Gala, Robert's personal stage. For 5349, Eliza, her mother's presence was non-negotiable. This fight was no longer just about 5355 uncovering the truth. It was about delivering justice. And for that to happen, the victim's voice had to be 5402 heard. The grand ballroom glittered with false brilliance, a perfect setting for the 5408 unmasking. Robert was in his element, the charming, benevolent host. That was until he saw 5415 Gideon and Eliza cutting a path directly toward him. His practiced smile became a 5421 brittle facade. Robert Gideon began his voice low and 5427 cold, cutting through the pleasantries. The games are over. We know about Daniel 5432 Owen Pierce, the true heir. Robert scoffed, preparing a condescending 5437 dismissal. Gideon, you've clearly been listening to fairy tales from a... He was 5442, cut off by a woman's voice, weak but amplified by a microphone that sliced 5448 through the ballroom's polite chatter. His fairy tale cost my father his life. 5455. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the entrance, where Laura Holloway sat in a wheelchair. Her gaze 5502 locked on Robert with an intensity that defied her frailness. William Pierce 5509 destroyed my father because he was friends with the honorable man your family threw away? Laura declared. My 5515 father was forced to keep your secret. I will not. As gasps rippled through the stunned 5522 crowd, the massive screens on stage meant to display photos of the foundation's good works flickered. Eliza 5529 held up her phone, and the damning image from the Parisian Ledger filled the screens for all to see. The entry 5536 detailing the commission for 2 rings and the name to be inscribed within the second Owen. Trapped, Robert stared from 5544. Laura's accusing face to the irrefutable proof on the screens. He was cornered by 5550, a ghost from the past and evidence set in stone. Gideon stepped forward, his 5556 voice ringing with chilling authority. My family's legacy is built on a lie, 5602 he announced to the captive audience. A lie my grandfather silenced a man to 5609 protect. And a lie my cousin, he turned, pinning Robert with a glare, planned to 56.14 use for his own personal gain. The public accusation pushed Robert over 5620 the edge. His carefully constructed composure shattered into pure, unrestrained rage. You fool, Gideon! 5630 he hissed, forgetting the live microphone just inches from his mouth. I was trying to protect us. I knew the 5636 truth, and I kept it buried. You and your pathetic little waitress have ruined everything. 5643, the confession amplified for all to hear, echoed in the dead silence of the ballroom. In a single 5649 self-incriminating breath, Robert had confirmed a century of corruption, and 5654 authored his own spectacular downfall. He stood alone, exposed under the 57 sequin glittering chandeliers, the king of a corrupt castle that had just crumbled to dust around him. The aftermath of the 5708 gala was a whirlwind of headlines and resignations. The Pierce dynasty was shaken, but in the ensuing quiet, it was 5716 being reborn, not broken. Weeks later, in a sun-drenched private hospital suite, 5723, a fragile peace had settled. Laura Holloway, looking out over a green garden, had a light in her eyes that 5730. Eliza hadn't seen in years. The weight of a lifetime of secrets had finally 5736 been lifted. Gideon Pierce entered the room quietly, no longer an untouchable 5741 tycoon, but a man humbled by the truth. He didn't offer empty apologies. 5747, instead, he placed a leather-bound document on the table beside Laura's bed. 5753, the Daniel Owen Pierce Foundation, he said, his voice steady and sincere. 5760, it will exist to fund the independent inventors and artists my family tried to crush. A significant portion of my 5807 family's fortune will serve as its endowment with the estate of Owen Calloway as its first honorary 5814 beneficiary. Tears welled in Eliza's eyes. It was more than restitution. It was justice, 5822, forged into a new legacy. Laura simply reached out and placed her 5827 hand over Gideon's. You have honored him, she whispered. 5833, you have honored them all. Gideon then looked at Eliza, pulling his own Phoenix 5838 ring from his finger and placing it next to the one that had started it all. The two rings, twin flames of pale gold, lay 5847 side by side, finally reunited. One for the builder, one for the guardian, he, 5854, said, his gaze locking with hers. I can rebuild the company, but it has been 5859 missing its soul for a century. Help me bring it back, Eliza. It was an offer, 5905, not of money or power, but of purpose. Looking at the two ring symbols of a 5911 promise finally kept Eliza saw a clear path forward. Yes, she said, her voice 5917 firm and her heart full. Let's give them a legacy to believe in. A single 5923 sentence in a late-night diner set in motion a chain of events that rewrote 5928 history. Eliza Haley, a waitress who fought for her mother's honor, proved 5934 that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a power that no fortune can 5940 suppress. And Gideon Pierce, a billionaire trapped in a gilded cage of 5946 lies, discovered that true wealth isn't about what you inherit, but about the 5952 integrity you choose to build. Their story reminds us that every family has 59 to 58 its secrets, and that it sometimes takes the courage of an outsider to bring the 6003 truth to light, allowing the phoenix to finally rise from the ashes. If this 6009 story of truth, justice, and the incredible power of one person's voice, 6014 moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who 6020 appreciates a story that's more than just fiction. Don't forget to subscribe 6025 to our channel for more true life dramas that will stay with you long after the 6032 screen goes dark. Click that notification bell so you never miss a 6037 upload. Thank you for listening.